Welcome everybody to live Q&A. I am Pastor Dave. This is Pastor and the Recovering Heretic, and with me is
Dan, non-pastor but recovering
but
heretic.
Recovering Heretic. Hi, Dan.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good.
Well, that was the shortest episode we
Yeah,
ever
that was the short. Well, that's all we got. Bye.
Got no questions.
Yeah, got no questions. Jesus said it all. There are
said
days
it.
where I'm like that, where I'm like, oh no, Jesus said it. Just read it again on your own time.
Yeah. Well, we've got today. Our overall topic is going to be about the necessity of a Messiah.
Okay.
But before we get to that,
Mm-hmm.
some points about today's and last week's readings about John.
Yep.
Which actually are what led me to the question of, do we even need a Messiah?
Right.
But some of the other aspects of that, especially in today's episode, today's gospel reading, sorry.
Yep.
I've been immediate.
Yeah, you can say episode.
Yeah.
It's fine. Pericope is the fancy church word for episode.
Okay.
So in today's pericope.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
Today's pericope.
Yeah.
Steve had a very good question, and I've wondered about this too. If you take what Jesus says in today's reading, when he's talking about, did you expect a prophet? You know, blah, 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 about John. If you read it with a slightly different mindset, it sounds like Jesus is dissing John. He's bad-mouthing John. And is that what's going on?
Yeah, you could read. He's not bad-mouthing John, but he is kind of, he's drawing a hard distinction between John's ministry and the kingdom of, and the coming of the kingdom of heaven in him. Mm-hmm. You know, like it's not a dissing, but it's a hard and fast distinction. You know, that John is the final culmination of these Old Testament prophets, the prophesied second coming of Elijah.
Yeah,
you know,
which you mentioned last week.
Right, like reborn Elijah, you know, as he says, the greatest of all under that under that system, the greatest of all prophets that ever will be or was
is John.
You know. But and then he says the hard and fast distinction is that in this new promised reign of the kingdom of heaven, like it flips all the values. Yeah. So like no matter how great you are under that old system, then the newness takes precedence. You know, does that make sense?
It does, and he kind of wraps that up. You know, yet the least in the kingdom is greater than
John. Right? Doesn't mean John's not in the kingdom. It just means flip your
priorities here.
Flip your priorities, and well, kind of like I said in the sermon, like start seeing these things differently. You know, and something new is happening. You know, in me, says Jesus, right? And because something new is happening, that means as good as the old thing was, something new takes priority.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. But in some ways, it sounds like a network touting its new fall lineup. You know?
It kind of is.
As good as last season was, just check out what we've got.
Check out the new spin-off series, Jesus of Nazareth. Yeah, it kind of is.
Jesus Part 2.
Right, yeah. So, yes, that's kind of what he's saying, you know.
And Steve points out his observation from what you said. So again, Jesus is promising to change everything. The bad get punished and the good will rise.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say I think Jesus is promising to change everything. And the priorities are mercy through the mercy through the cross, which means you will die, but you'll be raised. You know, it's a little different than the bad will be punished and the good will rise. It's more what's in you. You know, it's the fate of us all, right? You know, what in you will die, will be crucified. It has been crucified and it will be crucified, you know, at your death. You know, it will die in you and I will raise you into something new, you know.
It almost sounds more like a crucible instead of a crucifix. Burns off.
Well, right, that's the metaphor, right? The refining fire.
Yeah.
You know, I think we prayed that in one of the prayers, you know, like bring about your refining fire, right? You know, purgation, not purgatory, but purgation. It burns away that which is in you, which is chaff. There's chaff in all of us. So
although being in charge of the compost ministry here, I see chaff as very valuable.
It is valuable, right? Well, right. I mean, that's right. That it burns away is not meant it didn't have a purpose.
Good, because I like my compost. Not giving that up.
Yeah.
So John's question, again, there's this little thematic thing going on here.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how much changes if you read this in the original Greek. But again, if you slightly change the emphasis and perspective of this whole reading, it almost sounds like the opposite of Jesus bad-mouthing John, as Steve brought up. But the other way is John bad-mouthing Jesus. It's like John sends two of his own disciples.
Yeah.
And the way it's phrased here, to me, it conjures this image of he sent them to spy on him. Yeah, it's like, I don't know if I trust this. My cousin, Jesus.
Right. Right.
And so there's a feeling to me here of, Jesus went, he worked with John for a while, understands John's ministry, all that. John gets arrested.
Yeah.
And again, I am the, recovering heretic. Mm-hmm. So, but almost a coup in that, okay, John's locked up. Now I'm going to start my ministry on top of his. And so John from prison is sending a couple of his dudes over to say, whoa, what's Jesus doing here?
Yeah, I mean, this is a question of it greatly depends how you read it. So if you read the church father commentaries on this, they're all convinced that John knows Jesus is the Messiah, and he's doing this for his disciples' sake, so that they understand that he's the one to come instead of him.
That almost sounds like groupthink, though, to just further the cause.
Well, right, except that is John's sole purpose is to further Jesus's cause, right, or the Messiah's cause, right? So I could see it; it's fine. Yeah. More modern commenters do hear this, and there's something about doubt in our present age. We do hear that. I don't know if it's spying, but you could definitely read the questions with a hint of, I thought this was going to look differently. Is this really it? I was not expecting. I was expecting great chaff and unquenchable fire, and much winnowing, and I don't see much winnowing. Where's the winnowing?
Lamenting and gnashing of teeth.
Right, there is not wailing and gnashing of teeth. Where is it? Where is the axe at the root of the tree? And because that was all his sermon was last week, right? The axe is at the root of the tree, and and I don't see much axes or roots of trees, and.
Not even a little gentle pruning.
Right. There doesn't seem to be any even pruning. So what gives, and you could definitely hear it as doubt. Are you actually the guy I've said you are, or is this, am I still waiting around?
Yeah. Well, and and that's part of where I then see where Steve is coming from by saying, is John dissing?
Yeah. I don't think
it's Jesus dissing John, because in response to that, I can hear Jesus being sassy and sarcastic when he's saying, well, what did you go to the desert for?
Well, he is being sarcastic to the crowd. Okay. The crowd is being dissed a little bit here, which is a little different than John.
Okay.
And his diss is, did you simply go out to see the show?
Was this entertainment?
Yeah, right. There's little details all of Herod's coins had reeds from the Jordan Valley on them. That was their symbol, was reeds, So combine that with the palace line. Herod did build great palaces out in the wilderness. We still have them. They're some of the most monumental structures in Israel still today. These giant fortresses and palaces kind of out in the middle of nowhere in the desert. Masada is one of them, actually. It's one of these great palace fortresses that. But if you've ever been to Masada, it's literally in the middle of nowhere. It's just there. It's on top of this giant mountain, middle of nowhere.
Why did he do that? Was it his getaway home?
Yeah, because he thought it was cool, and so there's this. And so his diss is what did you go out to see? Did you go out to see Herod and Herod's BS, Did you go out to see power? Did you, and if you went out to see power, well, did you just go out to see John? But if you went out to see power with John, like you missed, John's powerful. He's best that's ever done it, and there will be no one better, but you've missed the whole point if that's all you went out to see, and so he is judging. The crowd is getting lambasted, not John per se, but the crowd is getting lambasted.
Given that there's some acknowledgement here of what a powerful preacher or prophet John was. I know in Islam and in the Quran, there's a great deal of respect for Jesus and for Mary. What about John? Does that carry over as well? And in Judaism, is John acknowledged as a prophet?
I actually don't know John. I don't know John in the Quran. I don't think he's acknowledged as particularly prophetic in Judaism, mostly because of his connections to Jesus.
And could he have been seen as more of a political, given his criticisms of Herod, and that might be part
of it? Oh, well, I mean, there's no hard and fast distinction between the prophet as religious and the prophet as political.
They serve both functions.
Yeah. Prophet, you need to, my best description of prophets in the ancient world is that they were the ancient world's pundits. Like the pundits we have on, like, news media or in the newspapers or things like that. Pick your favorite opinion op-ed writer in the New York Times. That's
what prophets.
That's what a prophet was. And it was using. It talked about the future sometimes. A prophet sometimes predicted the future. John says, yes, the Messiah is coming. But it used that in the same way an opinion writer or a pundit does today, in that it's saying, well, if we don't do something about what's happening now, this is what will. It's really about the now. It's just kind of talking about, well, if you're on this path, good or bad, but yeah, so prophets were really just, so inherently that job is political. It's no distinction. There's no distinction between the life of Israel as politics and the life of Israel as religion. So one of the prophet's biggest gripes against Israel is that they're not doing what they were supposed to do in taking care of the poor and the disadvantaged, and I guess that's a political program, but it's also a religious. In the same breath, they will then tie that to idolatry, and there's no distinction. It's not two separate things. It's one coherent. You're not worshiping the Lord your God as you sought, and therefore you are not taking care of the poor, the disadvantaged. You're not having the welfare policies you should have, But the two go hand in hand. And so there's no distinction between, to be a prophet was to be political, but also to be religious. They're not so cleanly separated in their world.
Yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot you have to step back on to realize we're looking at it with modern eyes and not the culture of the time.
Right. Because to say to say something's wrong with the religion is to also say something is wrong with the people who are in charge of the religion, the king, the high priest, the temple establishment. To say that there's some basic flaw there in your religious life is to simultaneously say there's some basic flaw in your civic life.
Because they're so tightly interwoven.
Right. They're so tightly. And I actually don't think we like to divide them, but they can't actually be as cleanly divided as we like them to be, and so, so my little example all the time, but like how we talk to each other on Facebook in the Facebook comment section. Like, we may not think of that as a religious thing, but it is a religious problem. Like, it's actually it's a religious problem. You're not seeing your brother or sister in Christ as your brother and sister in Christ. You're seeing them as an opponent to be victorious over or be nasty to. We don't think of that as a church thing, but it actually is a religious thing. It's a failure of religion. It's a failure of our faith.
Definitely trolling is not an Abrahamic virtue.
So. Right. Internet trolling is, not, is a faith problem, as much as it is anything else, and there's a lot of things we could go over like that, but um, they're not nearly as cleanly divided as we like to make them out to be.
Yeah. Well, that then gets us pretty neatly into what was supposed to end up being the main topic.
Yep.
If we quickly become a subtopic, is a Messiah even necessary then? And I bring that up because we talk about the Abrahamic, right? Of the 3 Abrahamic religions, we're the only ones that have the Messiah, and we're looking for the second coming.
Yeah.
And from what you described last week, the Judaic concept of the Messiah is vastly different from the Christian concept of the Messiah.
Right.
And Islam doesn't seem to be expecting a Messiah per se.
That's because in Islam it's weird because it's the Quran itself.
Yeah.
Like the word, it's the
word is there in the Quran.
Right. Yeah. It's the word, the messianic role is done by the Quran itself.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it doesn't have one,
it's just a different manifestation.
Yeah, it's manifested in the words of the Quran. Similarly, I would say Judaism has a similar concept of the Torah accomplishes this role.
Yeah.
But
then Hinduism, Buddhism.
Yeah, they do not.
So why are we of the 5 major world religions?
Right.
Why are we the only one that has this concept of an incarnate Messiah, holy, who is so vital and center to the entirety of the religion?
Yeah. Where to even begin with that one? It's a big one.
Yeah, it's definitely a BTQ.
Very big. Okay, let's start with the easy place to start, because this is the objectively provable one.
Okay.
You're a mess and you're in need of saving. That is like Christianity's basic premise.
Yeah.
The anthropology of the religion is you're a beloved child of God who is an absolute mess in need of saving. And I won't speak for you, but I can speak for me. That one seems provable at every turn in my own life.
That depends on whether my wife's in the conversation.
Right. And so Renee can probably testify that this is an absolute certain truth. Even, and depending on how far you want to go with it, but I will go here. I would argue, even at your best, your most charitable, you're still a disaster awaiting, and it's a mess you're not able to dig yourself out of,
I'll go with you on that. But what's wrong with being a mess? And I just say that because I'm one of those people that it is the imperfections, it is the struggle to get better.
So it's not just
it's the journey, not the destination.
It's not just imperfection. It's the idea that you don't. So let's. Where to even begin with this one?
I knew this wasn't going to be an easy one.
Right, it is a big one. So it is the uniqueness of your mess that it's not just that you struggle and you get better. It's not just that there's growth. It's not that you're incomplete and you're growing. That's not the problem. The problem is that let's say do not covet, right? So let's use commandments, easier to do this with. So naturally speaking, if nobody told you to covet, you would still covet things. You would still desire something that's not yours, right? And you can't tell me that hasn't ever happened once in your life.
No, but or no and. This is part of classic psychology and personality development. That coveting is one of even Piaget's levels of childhood development.
Yep, and that's why you're right. But that's the thing, right? The sickness is so embedded in you, you can't develop without it.
Yeah.
Right?
Because with psychology,
right,
with stages development, you can And this is the distinction. This is part of the work I'm doing now. Not everybody does this. But you can grow beyond then the covetousness. But you do.
But you do have to go through
right,
it.
And they do. All the stages people,
right,
whatever branch of psychology they're from,
you have to go through it.
They do all say, yeah, you can't skip a stage. Even if it's 5 minutes, you've got to go through it.
Right. So this is the nature of the sickness. You have to do it. You actually, as a human being, you can't develop without it.
Yeah.
You know, and yet it's not good, actually, you know, in that sense, right? Coveting leads to all sorts of other problems.
Yeah, no matter how you look at it.
Right, no matter how you look at it. And a 2-year-old coveting, agreed, it's a stage of psychology that they can't avoid. But anybody who's seen a 2-year-old throw a temper tantrum over that coveting knows it's not a good thing.
Right.
Right.
The covetousness was a seed that led to this
and
really bad behavior.
And here's the nature of the sickness. And this is what I really mean by the nature of the sickness is such that, okay, you would, without being told not to do it, you would still do it. And if you are told not to do it, that's no credit to you if you then stop.
Yeah.
Because you should have figured out, I shouldn't do this. And it's so bad that you have to be told, don't covet, you know, and yet you do anyway. And even if you stopped, it still wouldn't be any credit to you because it took somebody telling you to stop doing it in order to do it. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And I see a little ontological loop here.
But, well, there is. I mean, it's a circle because there's no holes in it, you know. But that's the nature of the sickness of sin, is kind of the Christian argument, you know, that
it's there. Everybody has it at some level.
Yeah, at some level. And not only do we do it naturally, do we do it just kind of because we are, you know, in this broken system, you know. But the nature of the law is such that, one, our natural instinct after being told not to do the thing is to do the thing.
Right, that rebellious nature.
The rebellious nature.
You can't tell me what to do.
But even if we stop because we are told not to do it, it took us being told not to do it to stop, right? Killing is a better example. You know, it shouldn't take somebody telling us, do not kill, for us to figure out not to kill.
Right.
But it does, we have to have a whole commandment. You know, there's a whole black and white, thou shalt not kill, you know, there. And it takes us, and it's no credit to us that we stop after somebody says, you shouldn't murder anybody. It's like, well, yeah, right.
I can see that completely.
Okay.
For that sector of humanity, and this is a personality type.
Yeah.
That is very rules based. You know, there's not a natural ability to understand morality and ethos, whatever. They need the rules that say do this, don't do that, and without them, they could very well just go off.
Yeah.
But there is also another set of people who are not rules based, and they do either reason or intuit through a higher morality, a higher ethical code.
Yeah, but even then, like, again, like killing isn't just killing, right? You know, like, this gets to Luther's explanation of the commandment. Like, it's you violate thou shalt not kill, says Luther, anytime you fail to support your neighbor in all of life's needs. You know, so like even the person who reasons to the higher morality, I shouldn't kill. One, that's not much of a gold star. You know, it's kind of like whoop-de-doo.
Yeah.
You know, like, you figured it out. Congrats.
You know, no duh, Sherlock situation.
Yeah, no duh. Right. Okay, you got that far. But then there's this next step of the actual obligation to us as living creatures is that we should support each other in all of life's needs. And boy, do we not, no matter how good you are, boy, do we fail on that one.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, to most people, it's going to sound trite. You'll get it. But like 2 months ago, that was the entire point of that issue's Avengers comic book. With Hawkeye being tested by a celestial, basically.
Right.
And that was the whole point of it.
Right.
Was exactly that.
That he failed.
And the reason was what Clint Hawkeye figured out was that no matter how good you are, no matter how good the actions you take, you can't understand all the ripples.
Right.
So in thinking you're being incredibly virtuous and saint-like in helping this person,
right. This is the
there
nature.
Still may be a ripple where it hurt this person over here.
And that's the nature of the mess, right? That's the nature of the sickness in all of us, right? Okay. So we've got the problem.
So again, it took Hawkeye for me to get it.
Yeah,
okay.
It took Hawkeye for you to get it, but think Hawkeye. That's the nature of your problem,
Okay.
right? Your ripples ripple out in such a way that they will probably and certainly cause harm somewhere else, even in your best of intentions.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. That's our sickness.
Okay.
So then, the next step is that God promises that this won't happen anymore in various ways. In various ways of articulating this. There's a lot of hopes of a promised time when this won't happen anymore, and God's going to fix this problem, right?
We finally get reality 2.0.
Right. There will be reality 2.0 where this is, and there are, the entire Old Testament is page after page of articulated promise of how this won't happen how God's promising, I'm working a future that reality 2.0, this won't happen. Okay. And then, so the only question is, how do we get from reality 1.0? How do we port over reality to 2.0?
And further complicating the issue is, and the New Testament says this over and over again, we don't know the release date.
Right. We don't know the release date. Right. So it could happen at any moment. The website could change at any time, okay. So that then insert Messiah here. That's what the Messiah says, and so, and the uniqueness of the Christian promise of the Messiah is that it is God incarnate taking on human form and then dying and being raised, and so there's two parts to that. The first is God becoming incarnate, and the church fathers said this is really so. This guy called the Cappadocian Fathers. These three guys, and they made this really important point. And what they said is that which is not assumed cannot be healed. Right, and so we need this Messiah, and we need this Messiah to be God, because only God can fix. Only God taking on your nature can get us to reality 2.0. That's how you're ported over to the new reality, And so
the Messiah is the compiler code.
Right. But if you're only partially compiled, then you're worse off than you were at the beginning.
Yeah, because now you've got all these bugs and glitches.
Right. Now you've got debug, now you've got defragging problems, right?
Yeah.
And to use this programming metaphor, which is kind of rough, but
but it is enabling me to see it.
Right.
So.
And so what that meant is that God has to wholly take on all that it means to be human, because it's the only way to wholly port over, to compile everything in your code
into the new code,
into the new reality. Okay. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay. Second part of that is the death and resurrection, which is what's accomplished in your baptism. Is you have to be united to the compiling code. Actually has to latch on to the various bits of data in you, and that's what happens in baptism. Again, this is a really rough metaphor, but
it makes sense.
But
right?
so what it
without
says,
the database, the program can't run.
Right. And so what happens is that we say you have put on the Lord Jesus Christ in baptism. So that nature that assumed all that it meant to be human, in your baptism, you've taken on all that it means to be Jesus. So you've been united to the compiling code, and you will eventually be, through a long process that includes your death,
much to many people's chagrin.
Right, much to many chagrin, but includes your death, you will be finally ported over into reality 2.0, which is partially heaven, but also partially this recreated world and this promise that all that stuff that we were talking about for the first 20 minutes isn't true anymore.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so, but the Messiah is the one who accomplishes that transfer of data.
I get that. And we're out of time because this really deserves more exploration. And one thing I want to make clear too, if basically Christianity for nerds didn't work for you, let us know.
Right.
So we can explore this further and get another metaphor.
Right.
Because it's at the crux, really.
Yeah.
And so it's an important concept to grasp. And I didn't even start until today with that. Fortunately for me, the coding metaphor really worked. And I would like to further explore in that episode, maybe part 2 next week, I don't know. The ramifications of the fact that it is only us who hold on to that belief. What about the other 4/5
of
religious
right.
humanity? And so, obviously, not to get into today because that's like an hour long by itself.
The essential question is, can you do it yourself, or do you need somebody to do it for you? Like, can you do a direct data transfer to reality 2.0, or do you need the compiling code to do it? If we're using it.
Can you hack on your own?
Can you hack on your own, or do you need the transfer program? And a lot of religions, and even a lot of Christians, want to say you can do it on your own, in some way, whether it's Buddhism's, you get multiple attempts, this life of enlightened, this cycle,
the cycle of samsara,
right? Or Islam's, rigorous,
following the 5 pillars,
right? Rigorous submission to the will of Allah. A lot of religions want to say there's some way you can, and to some degree you have some input into doing it on your own. And the Christian kind of belief is, well, no. This is the basic dividing line. We would say, no, you can't. And any attempt to just messes up your program further. Right.
Try as hard as you want.
Try as hard as you want. It's not going to work.
Okay. And Steve does want us to keep discussing it. So that's currently 100% of our feedback.
Yeah, there we go. We'll take it.
So we will. So thank you. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Karen, Renee. Kathy, I don't know if you were hanging out, but thank you. All right. And we'll revisit this for sure.
Okay.
In the meantime, see you next week.
Thank you, folks.